So, Bat Family, it's been over 3 weeks, getting on to a month now since the last installment of the Batman discussion series. As I said, I'm going to make them a little bit fewer and far between on the channel, but still keep it going due to popular demand. And so, on top of previous questions we've got as a little bit of a backlog, I've also put out a community post asking you for some questions that we haven't necessarily got to in previous discussion series videos. So today, we're digging into a bunch of them. I am going to try and get through as many as I can. I say try because I usually spend like 5 to 10 minutes per one sometimes. But by this point, you should know how these videos go. I hope you go on to enjoy it. If you do, it really shows your support just by leaving a like. It helps boost this video out there. I know I say that all the time, but it really does help. And if you haven't seen it already, I do recommend checking out my previous Batman video I did, which is 10 things I want to see in the Batman 2. I get pretty in-depth with that, so if you haven't seen that, do make sure you don't miss it. But without further ado, let's start off with question 1. Now, this is from AJ Lara, and they say, okay, Boba, here's one I don't think you've discussed. Personally, I love seeing a hero in a battle-damaged version of their suit, much like we've seen in animation and in Batman vs. Superman. To me, the scene at the end where Batman is covered in mud from saving people from the flood isn't the kind of damage I'd like to see. I was thinking something more akin to how Tobey's suits would be towards the end of his movies. Perhaps the mask is broken to where you can see one entire eye of Bruce, or his chest piece being broken and severed. This may be a moment where Bruce can see that it's not just the suit or the symbol of the Batman that has all the power, it's Bruce himself as well. Would this be something you'd like to see in the second or other future installments? So yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously at the end of the first movie, he had quite a bit of mud from leading everyone out to safety. He did have quite a bit of bullet damage, obviously through being shot point blank with various guns. So there was some nice damage there, which I do want to acknowledge, but I do agree with you. And it kind of, the first thing that comes to my mind is when I really heavily got back into the Batman lore side of things. And that's when Batman was navigating his way throughout this somewhat Court of Owls maze. Now, if I remember correctly, do correct me if I'm wrong, I may be thinking this is out of some other comic book or something like that. But essentially, this, or what I'm thinking about, really summarizes exactly what you're saying. The power isn't just the Batman. You know, I know when he puts on that suit, in so many iterations, it is his alter ego. He is kind of leaving Bruce behind, and he is Batman in those moments. But when he goes through that Court of Owls maze, there is a very similar thing to where his mask, I believe it even shows an eye as he's being driven closer and closer to the edge of sanity through what the Court of Owls maze puts him through. That was a really good story, which is why people really rate the Court of Owls volume and the City of Owls volume quite highly. So yeah, in that, I believe he's literally got an eye, a part of his eye missing, and obviously in the comics, it shows white eyes. So when you saw that on screen and seeing Bruce's eye there visible, it was really impactful. I really remember it vividly. Now, obviously, in the Batman movies, he doesn't have white eyes. He might not get white eyes. That's not really the topic we're talking about. But I do agree that in the second movie, or in the third movie, of course, if he has to go through some kind of hardship, I'm not saying it has to completely mimic that Court of Owls maze, but of course, it would just be so good, especially with Robert Pattinson being a very talented actor himself. With the directing, the cinematography, that was incredible. If they got into some kind of crucible like that, where it really strips Batman down, not only mentally, but as what we're talking about here, physically. The danger of this is, in a sense, if Matt Reeves is grounding it on screen, that obviously having a part of his cowl missing like that, you could basically, probably, depending on who the villain is or whoever's putting him through the situation, identify that is Bruce Wayne. I do completely love your comparison to the Tobey Maguire suits. The way they kind of chop those up for the final Green Goblin battle in the original Spider-Man movie and even in the other movies is brilliant. So I would like something like that, of course. Maybe you could get to a moment where it's like Hugo Strange and maybe they know the Batman's identity, and instead of, you know, let's say the Riddler surviving, and by the way, I am usually always on the side of the villain surviving, and I feel like Matt Reeves' universe will definitely have that instead of doing the Birds of Prey killing Black Mask thing. I feel like if you do that, though, where you strip half of his mask down, or how epic would it be, by the way, if the cowl is destroyed and he's just in the Batman armor with the cowl off? That would be so cool. But if, let's just assume, hypothetically, that was Hugo Strange putting him through something like that, I assume the villain would have to die or something like that to maintain Batman's secret identity of that of Bruce Wayne. But without dragging this one out for too much longer, I definitely would love some more battle damage armor. They already got that in the first movie, so they definitely also like doing that themselves. But definitely, other than bullets, something like what you're saying would be extremely engrossing to watch on screen. It doesn't have to be a maze, obviously, as what I was saying, but anything in the vein of that Court of Owls situation with Batman. Oh my god, I can see. The thing I love about recording these videos, and I think the reason why it is still such popular demand for this discussion series, is because of our imagination, how passionate we are for the vision of Matt Reeves and these movies. So I can so easily imagine a scenario where Robert Pattinson's acting chops are coming out in a situation where he is just pushing on. Like, you know when he pushed on when he shot the adrenaline into him to save Selina? It's like that, but lasting for like 20 minutes, and then with battle damaged armor and maybe I think the cowl is obviously the most symbolizing way of showing that struggle, so I do agree. Cowl damage would be awesome, but not too invasive where it kind of reveals his identity, or if it does, then you have to do something with whoever is doing that to him, because we can't have Batman's identity floating out there. But of course, everyone else who's watching this first question, lend me your ideas or theories as to how you think they could realistically do that. I'm sure many of you will come up with quite a few interesting scenarios. For now, I've just kind of likened it to the Court of Owls situation, but maybe there's many others that you guys can think of. So question 2 is from Da Bar, saying, "Hey Boba, I've been a fan for a while, thank you. My question is, do you think we'll see a cohesive weaving of storylines from the Arkham show and the Penguin into the Batman sequels? Or do you think they'll mainly just build out the world in those? Also, any chance of a new or enhanced Batcave?" So, is there going to be a cohesive weaving of storylines from the Arkham show and the Penguin show into the sequels? I definitely think so, 100%. It's going to be a bit of an interesting situation, though, because I don't think it's going to be an absolute, you have to see the Penguin series, you have to see the Arkham series for when you see that second movie. Like, whatever the events are in there, I think they will have echoes from even when that show is finished, it's 6 to 8 episodes or whatever it is on HBO Max of the Penguin show or the Arkham series. It will still have like these echo beats going out in the Batman movie. The best example I can think of this is through introducing characters. So, for example, in the Penguin show, you could have various other gang leaders, mobsters, or whatever, various characters you may recognize from the animated series or the comics that Oswald has to go up against before he truly sits on the throne that Falcone left spare after his death. And with the Arkham series, another one, and an easy one, is just to introduce characters, but with also trying to control yourself. And what I mean by that is the creators behind it not going ham and just be like, oh look, there's Hugo Strange, oh look, there's Harley Quinzel, oh look, there's Dr. Jonathan Crane. They need to kind of, you know, not bleed into it massively, but also it would be awesome to literally introduce characters. So the easiest one I think I would like to see is for sure Jonathan Crane. He doesn't have to be fully fledged Scarecrow, because one thing, the parameters of what we need to keep in mind with Matt Reeves is he does love everyone being in their early states. For example, a Batman who's still becoming, granted we picked up in year 2, a Joker who's still becoming. He wasn't quite literally titled Joker the same way as Selina isn't titled Catwoman. They are characters who are still becoming. So the same would indeed be put onto Jonathan Crane. He could be the head of psychology. It's the same thing with Oz, by the way. He has got the low-key derogatory term the way he views it as the Penguin, but he probably won't be crowned that and embrace that himself and change his own opinion on that name he views derogatory at the moment until the end of the Penguin series. So there will be these echoes that do bleed out into the second movie, of course. Building on the world is probably the main focus, because again, going back to all the people who might not watch the shows and just still watch the second movie and the third movie, they still need to understand mainly what's going on. But I do think that will still be somewhat given to the audience, they'll be spoon-fed in a sense, because I can imagine if you didn't watch the Penguin series, for example, you could have in the opening monologue with Batman in the second movie, or Bruce writing another journal entry in the Gotham Project, saying something like, I don't know, November 5th, the past 2 years, assuming there's a 2-year time jump, I don't know, we'll get onto that in another question, I'm sure. Crime has been rampant, blah, blah, blah. Oswald Cobblepot has become the new kingpin, filling in Falcone's, see what I mean? They'll probably give it to you on the spoon a little bit, but hey, if you wanna get a little bit more in depth in it, hey, there's a whole show where you can watch Oz ascend to the criminal underworld throne. As for any new or enhanced Batcave, enhanced for sure, new, no. A video I've been putting off for a little while because I wasn't sure if I was going to do it anymore because I was maybe a little bit late with it, is that we have learned lots about the movie in other mediums, whether that's concept art books, and I was going to do something like, things we've learned out of the movie, things that maybe many of you know, but some things that I don't think everyone does know. For example, people still think that the shot that Batman took at the end was Venom. It isn't. It's been literally very in detail labeled as adrenaline. Another thing is that people think that the Batcave, not saying that you think this, maybe you just thought there'd be a new one anyway, but some people think that it could be flooded, but it wasn't. Gotham in this iteration is like split into 3 different islands. You see Bruce, for example, after the mayor's death in the drifter mode, he goes over various bridges and he goes all the way to like the high end of Gotham. That's where Wayne Enterprises is, and underneath that is the Batcave. The area of Gotham that Riddler flooded is all the way over here. So for that reason, sure, like you could argue that the Batmobile might have been caught in the flooding and things like that, because the last time of wherever he parked it might be in that area. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the future movies, as well as this movie, was set in this area of Gotham. However, there's no reason as to why they would give us a new Batcave. But enhancements for sure. I think it will largely still have that same aesthetic. You're going to have the clock there, you're going to have the stairs going up the side. But I expect more projects in the works, maybe upgraded monitors, who knows. It really actually does depend on the time jump. And that's something I've been discussing recently. I believe there is a question we're about to get into. But, if it's only like 3 weeks to a month, which, I don't think it will be, there isn't really any reason to believe why Bruce would have got an enhanced Bat computer, if you know what I mean. Whereas if there's a couple of years, then, there's all kinds of opportunity for other things. I always think that the most interesting things we'll see is maybe more gadgety stations, maybe more things being worked on by Bruce on different areas of the Batcave, and also maybe just scenes where they expand the set, because in the behind the scenes, a lot of the set is built, but a lot of the area where the disregarded trains are, is added in with bits of CG. But it would be cool for Alfred and Bruce to walk over to various areas. For example, there's areas where Bruce can train. It'd be cool to see him doing some pull-ups and things like that there in various scenes. So I think it would be cool to see upgraded areas like that. Alright, so RJ Dark Knight says, in my opinion, I would love to see more of the GCPD in the sequel. There's so much Matt Reeves could explore in this area, and would be interesting to see Jim Gordon's relationship with the department after the first movie. What are your thoughts, Boba? So yeah, I agree, and just a little bit of a spoiler preview, I guess, in my top 10 things I want to see in the Batman 2, Jim Gordon, and also the splintering off aspects of Jim. I kind of enhanced on it as like a number out of those 10 things I wanted to see, plus A, B, C, D, because there's so much you can do with Jim. So I was talking about, more Jim, but also the GCPD, I agree. Even though Jeffrey Wright was incredible in the first movie, we got such accurate Batman and Gordon action, if anything, unparalleled to what we've seen before. Of course, Gary Oldman with Christian Bale, we got those two side by side, but this was straight out of the pages. However, one thing we didn't get is things like his personal life, but that's not really what you're asking. We can have not really repercussions, but seeing the effect of what does the department think now about how Gordon evidently did help Batman escape. Maybe they're not so on the ball of that, even though it should be kind of obvious, but now we have the commissioner out the way. Pete Savage died. We have a new commissioner coming. I don't know if that is going to be Jim, because he's a lieutenant right now. Sure, Sure, the new DA after Gil Colson blew up could be Harvey Dent, but I could imagine maybe Jim might not become commissioner until the third film. But either way, there's so much opportunity to get into the GCPD. I would like that, and there's still some people who don't know this, and since we're now not getting, remember how the first original HBO Max spin-off show of the Batman was going to be the GCPD show, or Gotham Central, whatever name it was going to take? That's no longer happening. So since we're now not getting that, maybe Matt Reeves might lend some ideas that he had to get into that with other characters that we could get into in the second movie. It's an incredibly hard process, which is, while I'm so envious of not being involved in some way, shape, or form in the creative side of this movie, there's also a side of me that thinks, man, it must be so hard to choose what to fill your screen time with in the second movie. So it really does depend. If you lean into too many areas of the GCPD, it would take away from some other cool scenes that they have to, like, hey, do I want to see this or this? Do you know what I mean? But if they even introduce characters like Bullock, that would be amazing. He doesn't need loads of screen time, but something where we see, hey, like, Bullock just gets involved on various scenes of the crime. Maybe he's on Jim's tail a bit because he's clearly working with the Batman. Not only is he clearly working with the Batman, we had various cops and whatnot literally see Jim Gordon bring a vigilante on the scene of the mayor's crime. So it'd be cool to see, as you said, Jim's relationship with the department after the first movie. And there's a million ways they can get into that, and I think it's only a natural, organic development in that second movie to lean more into this. I have a lot of faith that we're going to get a bit more with Jim than just working with Batman. I'm not complaining, by the way. I'm just saying a little bit more in other areas that you're referring to here. So next up is from Cole Baker saying, couple of talking points here that I would really like to see pondered and discussed. Do you think Wayne Manor will play a role in any of the future films, as well as a more traditional Batcave? Could be a migration for Bruce and Alfred after the tower was bombed by the Riddler. Also, I'm curious to hear how many years you think will have passed between movies within Reeves' universe. Thank you for keeping these discussion series alive. Glad the fandom is so strong. Well, I'm glad that you're really enjoying the videos still, and so many of you, again, thank you for the support. Even though I'm not doing them as much, it just makes them even more interesting, I guess, if I do it every 3 or 4 weeks. But, no, yeah, so Wayne Manor, I've always been ummy and ahry with this, because in a direct answer to you saying a migration because of, like, the tower was bombed by Riddler, after that bombing, we did see Bruce in there. It didn't look particularly too damaged. We saw a load of police around. We saw Bruce really hulked over because he was so scared of Alfred being hurt. But in that scene, you can clearly see that everything's okay. So I don't think that bombing by the Riddler would have completely made an excuse for them to move, unless maybe they want to repair the window, maybe, or whatever was blown away, that they've temporarily moved back to Wayne Manor. But again, going back on myself there, Wayne Manor is so run down. So I guess I take that back, because they would have to have quite a bit of refurbishment to fix that place up. Because if you didn't know already, despite us not knowing if it's loose canon or whatever, we discussed that in a previous discussion series episode, but just hypothetically assuming everything that happened in that prequel novel is true, Riddler burned it down, so it is quite worn down, and we saw that in the movie. But as for going back to Wayne Manor in another regard, I don't know how it would look if Bruce just kind of went back there, because the Waynes did donate that to orphans. So if Bruce Wayne was to renovate it and refurbish it, get it open again, what do you think of this? Would that kind of be weird if he didn't donate it to orphans again and just moved in himself? I know it's his family home. I guess some people would, like, bat their head to the side and just be like, hey, you know, yeah, but, like, since your parents donated it as an orphanage, why don't you, when having done it up again, donate it again as an orphanage? So I am wondering about that, but I wouldn't say no completely, because seeing Wayne Manor again, especially with another couple of movies coming our way, wouldn't be mega surprising, you know? I'm not going to discount it entirely, but I just wouldn't count on it, because I also do love, personally, the idea of Batman living in the heart of Gotham City. You know, he can look out the freaking window and he's there. He is there. He can jump out the window if he wants to, and then he can glide in his wingsuit. So I do love the idea that the Batcave is underneath Wayne Tower. It doesn't take him long to get somewhere. You know, all he has to do is go over the bridge if he needs to get to the other areas of Gotham. So that is something interesting to ponder with regards to Wayne Manor playing a role in future films. I actually wouldn't be surprised if, you know, with the time jump between films, if the second film opens not only with the flooding resolved, but also with Bruce coming out of his shell a bit more, as we discussed quite a lot here on the channel. Wayne Manor was already renovated and given back to the Gotham City orphanage, so to speak. So, like, it picks up with all these news reports. It would be a brilliant way to facilitate other ways of Bruce giving back to the city. And hey, he is giving back Wayne Manor. I'm actually kind of surprised that after it burnt down quite a few years ago, he hadn't already done that, because he could have. As for a more traditional Batcave, I don't know about that. I mean, I really like the one right now. It's traditional in the sense that an elevator goes down to it. I know it's a train station in a way, but you do see, like, the backdrop there is kind of a rocky formation as well. There's bats up there. So for me personally, I think this is a nice, innovative, traditional. It is the super traditional canon in a way as well. So I don't have any complaints personally. The upgrades, I refer back to my previous answer. As for how many years could have passed, I actually, funnily enough, even before seeing your question today, put out a tweet. By the way, follow me on Twitter. It is my most active place outside of YouTube to, I don't know, just say things. I said, how long do you really think the time skip will be between the Batman and the Batman Chapter 2? And as you're seeing on screen, got a few responses. And I've always been so to and fro with this. I really don't know what could truly happen. It may be so obvious to you, you maybe have such conviction in what you're thinking could be the time skip, but I feel like it's relevant in everyone's opinion, because Matt Reeves, I sometimes feel like, wants to keep this trilogy fairly cohesive, right? So doing a massive time jump of multiple years would basically not necessarily get rid of the development for Batman that Matt Reeves so utterly wants to show in this trilogy. And that's because obviously it could skip to the next most important stage that was significant to Bruce's development. But at the same time, if you wait 4 years up to that in between movie 1 and movie 2, you're kind of thinking, well, if this is kind of a low-key character study showing the Batman who's still developing, which is so abundantly obvious something and one of the most strongest things that Reeves wants to strive for, it's like, well, what happened over the past 4 years? Sure, it might be referenced in lines here or there, but that's a long time. So that's something I've always considered. But then again, having a week or a few months also seems like too little time as well. Even if you like go between that of a normal season of a show, there's like 8 to 9 months or a year tops that transpires between the off season in the continuity of the show as well. I think that could be the case, because we might get a Batman who is only picking up with Batman year 3. You know, maybe is like a few months into year 3. But at the same time as well, I think I've kind of come to a happy middle ground now, where I had issues of Wayne G talking about 1 to 3 years, and then I was saying, I don't know about multiple years because of the reason I just said, you know, skipping so much development, potentially. You know, 3 years as a vigilante is a long time, which is why I'm somewhat unsure. And then that's where Wayne G replied saying, well, there were long time skips between the Apes films. Since they're movies, the idea isn't to show every little aspect of his journey, but the most important turning points of his career. That's something I do agree with. So that's where, like, in conclusion, you know, we kind of, in the replies, got to the point of, I said maybe the larger time skip would happen between movie 2 and 3, where maybe you could go up to 4 years-ish. But movie 1 and 2, I would be surprised if it goes beyond 2 years. I think it will be 2 years or less. 2 years being the absolute maximum. Again, I'm going to hold my hands up if I'm wrong, but that's me going between sometimes a few months to that of, okay, now I'm actually entertaining up to 2 years. And also another reason is because, as Wayne G on Twitter pointed out, we do have the Penguin show, and that is bridging the gap between this first movie and that second movie. Now, we can't guarantee that Pattinson's going to appear in it, we can't guarantee that he's going to, if he does appear loads, but still, that show could still not only hone in on Penguin's development, but also the world building, so we get an idea of what things are happening. So I wouldn't be surprised if after the Penguin show, we get the second movie in 2024-ish or whatever, and we also have a bit of a commentary picking up, as I keep referring to, with Batman somewhat spoon-feeding us some of the events. Plus, we would have seen the Penguin show by that point, so we already know a lot of context. But from Batman's own side, if we don't see him as much as maybe you would like to in the Penguin show, we also see what he's kind of been doing in the city outside of what we maybe found out in the Penguin show. So he says, you know, on top of Penguin, doing this, that, and the other, what I was kind of saying earlier, he maybe says, you know, I've been dealing with the lawlessness, the looting. Oz Cobblepot has become the new kingpin of the criminal element, but over the past 15 months, I've been doing this, blah, blah. Do you see what I mean? Something very rough like that, not exceeding 24 months, but maybe 12 to 15, 16 months at the most 24. But yeah, I guess like a rough bracket would be 9 to 16 months is where I feel comfortable saying right now. That would put him in year 3, year 4-ish. I feel like that could very organically show the most and next most important aspect of his growth. You don't need to wait 4 years for that. But at the same time, completely game after the second movie that there can be a bit more time. Because then we could be like, okay, well, we've had 2 movies within the span of a couple of years of each other. Third movie doesn't need to be as long as Nolan's third movie, time skip between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, but I would be fine with a bit more time, given that it could show us quite a bit of a different Robert Pattinson Bruce Wayne. Not like different in a bad way, but only better, you know, but with more time elapsed between the second and third. So Wolfman C asks, hey Boba, so this question had bothered me a bit, and I want your take on it. One problem I've seen fans have with the MCU shows is that it feels like we're being forced to watch those shows in order to understand the movies. Granted that people either don't have the time, patience, or interest in watching some of the shows in order to do so. I've seen so many people who haven't watched WandaVision and were lost when watching Multiverse of Madness, even though they're all a need-to-know basis in order to understand the lore. I feel like Matt Reeves and his team should do the Penguin and Arkham shows where they keep it at a balance for fans who just only want to watch the movies versus the fans who want to learn the lore and understand the world a bit more further and detail. For example, Penguin was kind of already teased to be the next Kingpin / side villain for the second movie because of what Batman said, so everyone will already be expecting that. Yet the show can be like a way to dig deeper into the lore without breaking any boundaries for people who go into the second film questioning forceful plot points in that future movie. I'm curious on getting your take on this. Hopefully you can understand what I'm trying to ask here. Much love. Thank you, man. So it's kind of expanding on what we were saying earlier. I do remember Kevin Feige saying that with regards to Multiverse of Madness, you didn't need to see WandaVision. And I do agree with that. You kind of get the idea roughly, but it only insanely aids you into that context for sure. And I do think that will mimic what's going on here. With what I was saying earlier, the monologue or something like that will 100% assist those who didn't bother to watch the Penguin show, for sure. And let alone when you see Colin Farrell's Penguin, people who haven't seen the Penguin show, in the second movie, when you see Penguin, there'll be lines here and there exchanged. You'll see Oswald in a bit more of a grand position. There's subtext there that people will just understand anyway. As you said, even from the end of the first movie, it literally shows Penguin looking out at the city being flooded, and then lawlessness, looting, there's going to be a struggle, etc., etc. People will understand that there's been a natural evolution there, and the Penguin series will be somewhat optional to watch. But I don't think it's going to be a jarring thing to experience if you don't watch the Penguin show. I do think the balance will be there, of course, for those who just don't want to watch it and want to see the second movie and understand it, and for those who are like, oh wait, yeah, no, I actually really dig seeing the journey of how Oz became the kingpin of the criminal underworld. The only other thing that I can think of is if there's any new characters introduced, like other mobsters that might be prolific and could still be a part of the second movie. But again, I think the power struggle between those Oz is going up against to take that throne that Falcone left behind will somewhat be resolved in the Penguin show, and the new status quo of those who now don't oppose Penguin, but maybe those who report to him, will be the new thing that is established. It just depends if we pick up in the second movie seeing those characters as well, and some people might be like, hey, I haven't seen them before. But again, even then, I think there'll be subtext. It would just be kind of like, hey, Penguin's clearly the new kingpin. He's got all kinds of new cronies and other lower tier or rival gangs initially who were rivals to him now under his control, and he lets them have their own territory or something else. So Eben Sennett asks, hi, just found out about this channel and have been really enjoying the content. Thank you. My question is, do you think that this version of Batman would be more sympathetic towards other villains going forward, the same way he was towards Riddler? Also, do you think they would adopt certain elements from other stories for this franchise? I think that other serial killer characters would make good villains, but only if they take from certain stories like Golden Age Clayface or Arkham Games Hush. Yeah, of course, we've talked about this a lot on the channel before with regards to, I think, a natural development. The easiest one to compare to is Mr. Freeze would show to Bruce in the first movie, where he had a bit more of this black and white worldview of you're either a victim / good, or basically a victim, or you're bad. So Mr. Freeze would be a good way to kind of show that there's sometimes villains he'll come up against who he needs to take down and adjust his outlook there and maybe try and help save them in a different way rather than just crushing them. I kind of disagree with the same way he was towards Riddler. I don't think it was really sympathetic towards him. If anything, his last words to him was that you're a psychopath, a nothing, a nobody. You'll die in Arkham alone, a nobody. So I don't think he was mega sympathetic towards him there. Obviously, you can say that he might have felt something with regards to the fact that he was an orphan and whatnot, especially when we had Riddler literally articulating what living as an orphan was like. And that only made Bruce think, man, I probably had it easy despite losing my parents in that interrogation scene. As for other serial killer characters, yeah, I think that's something that Matt Reeves, keeping this grounded universe in the second and third movie. I am hoping for more fantastical aspects, of course, but I do believe that he will be also doing things like this possibly. And, the Golden Age Clayface is something we have discussed before with regards to my Penguin show updates, and he is a perfect example because the Golden Age Clayface wore a clay mask. He was playing a role. He was wearing a costume of a role that he had played before, and he was going around basically as like a slasher killer, fulfilling the role that he had played previously of how that killer was killing certain characters. He actually went around killing the other actors who died as a result of the killer he played in that movie. So yeah, I truly think that a way to ground Clayface would be to have a master of prosthetics. It's the easiest way. Unfortunately, it's not the fantastical way, but it would be true to Matt Reeves' way of staying in line with grounding it. How can we take that character, as he says, and ground it in this universe? Clayface would be a person who maybe they could give homages to, tribute to, a putty, a special ingredient or something that he uses to help facilitate the insane level of prosthetics that wouldn't even be believable in our world today. That's where they can bend the lines between fantastical. So yeah, they definitely can take from other certain stories like that to adapt in their future universe, of course. And also, I think that Matt Reeves will only take inspiration from what he's done, for example, with the Riddler, the Zodiac Killer, etc., etc. I think whoever the next villain is, there's always going to be something. We've seen this with other cases as well. For example, with Joker, Barry Keoghan's Joker, we know that one of his inspirations was The Man Who Laughs. So with Reeves, you're truly getting him channeling and getting specific inspiration from already existing things out there. And that's one of the things I like, because his inspirations are bloody fascinating. And, Zodiac Killer for the Riddler, that worked really well. The Man Who Laughs with Barry Keoghan's Joker, brilliant. What is next? Who would his inspiration be for Freeze, so to speak? So Pratic P says, Boba, do you think if the trilogy works, which is obviously going to work, yes, of course it is, would Warner Brothers Discovery continue this version of Batman with or without Matt Reeves and expand the universe any further? So, I don't think so, because then there's all other kinds of things you need to take into account. Like Robert Pattinson might only want to do 3 movies. Making these movies, not trying to just explain something you already know, but just stating the obvious, really, that it is incredibly hard work. It really is, even with some time off. And you may feel fulfilled after making 3 movies. This is why I don't want to shut down the possibility of more movies, because people say they would love 6 movies, like some of the other large franchises out there, or more even, which is why I can't say no to that. But it's not just dependent on Matt Reeves. Obviously, he could still executive produce, and get other directors in. You also need to take into account if the talent want to continue. Sure, you can do it without Catwoman. You could write her out if we were doing a 4th movie or whatever. Penguin could be, I don't know, put in Blackgate or something like that. So you don't always need every actor, but you need the star of the show, Robert Pattinson. I believe Andy Serkis, even if there was more movies, roles like his, he would always probably be down for. Alfred isn't always needed in every scene, so I would have confidence in actors like him always being involved if there was any more potential. But yeah, it really does depend on Robert Pattinson and what he's signed. And he said himself that he has a roadmap and a psychological roadmap for his Bruce Wayne development for another 2 movies, by the way, for 3 movies. So I think 3 movies is something I will kind of always keep saying until I am given any reason as to think otherwise, and that would be a very, very great day if we were told that we were getting more. But even without Matt Reeves, by the way, let's say Robert Pattinson wanted to continue and it was without Matt Reeves, I don't know about that. I got a feeling that over the Bond, you kind of create the story that the conversations you have as a leading actor and the director. Probably, if I was to, have a bit of theory speculation here with regards to that, Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson, by the time the 3rd movie is being shot and everything, they're probably gonna be like, you know what? Like, I feel like we've told a good story, a good 3 movies. Let's leave it here. That's the inkling I get. I don't think necessarily we should rely on Pattinson being like, yeah, I'll be here for 4 or 5 and, work with another director. Not that he wouldn't, because other directors work on different movies in a franchise all the time. It's just I have an intuition saying that with those 2 working together, the same director, the same cast and whatever, for another couple more movies, the 3rd movie comes up, it just makes sense to me that they would probably be thinking this might be a good place to leave it, potentially. But the Batverse could continue through shows and other ways. This is a situation that's always in flux until we know more. So Leo Hallen says, if they're going to build upon the sins of the father and the reporter storyline, how would you like to see it unfold in the sequel? I feel like there is so much to explore that could potentially become a Hush or a Court of Owls storyline. Maybe Thomas Elliot is seeking revenge for what the Waynes did to his father, or maybe Martha wasn't actually crazy, but it was a cover-up made by the Court of Owls. I think that this would take a heavy toll on Bruce either way, but what would you like to see if they continue to explore this storyline? Yeah, this is an interesting one. I've heard people say recently, I don't know if this is a theory going around somewhere, it's kind of new to me that maybe Martha wasn't crazy and that it was like a cover-up thing. I don't know about that. I feel like, Thomas Wayne wouldn't let that happen, and I don't think Thomas Wayne was in on any kind of forcing Martha into Arkham. They still went out together that night when they both got shot, so just kind of shutting down that theory for me. I don't think Martha would have gone to Arkham, or should I say Thomas Wayne would have let her go there if she was unwilling. But as for like the sins of the father storyline, for sure, I have an inkling of a suspicion that, and I spoke about this with people, that maybe Edward Nashton was going to be the son of this reporter, and maybe they changed the story throughout, because there's certain aspects of the Batman in the script that wasn't really explained, and this isn't even nitpicky. For example, there is lots that has been explained. You may have heard me talk about this before. Edward Nashton was a forensic accountant. It is very plausible with his intelligence and being a forensic accountant that he saw the paper trail for the Gotham Renewal Fund to those who were milking it, like the mayor, Falcone, and these other players like Gil Colson. So he had his targets for his kill list. But there's certain other things, like the reporter storyline with regards to how did the Riddler know about that if the report never came to fruition, never published. The story was only known about by Edward Elliot, who died, and only Thomas Wayne and Falcone. So I don't understand how he knew about that line, 20 years ago, one reporter set out to uncover the dark truth. He found shocking family secrets, how when Martha was just a child, her mother brutally murdered her father, then, and the line continues. Thomas Wayne tried to force this crusading reporter into a hush money agreement to save his mayoral campaign. Either way, the film doesn't really explain well at all how Edward Nashton, the Riddler, found out about that. So I do wonder if, in a Riddler Hush storyline kind of way, it makes sense, to be honest, for the son to be seeking this vengeance, by the way, not only on the city of the Gotham Renewal Fund. They keep the whole plot of how the Riddler, Edward Nashton, Paul Dano, was just still so frustrated with the corruption, but also how his father was a victim of all of this. But it turns out Edward Elliot wasn't Edward Nashton's father. But anyway, getting back on point, I guess the conclusion we have to draw is that in this universe, Edward Elliot, the reporter that died, could still have a son, Thomas Elliot, and we have heard Matt Reeves literally specifically state that one of his favorite characters or villains is Hush. So they definitely could continue that. At the end of the day, his father died. I guess there could be, especially now, one thing that needs to be acknowledged is that who knows what the public thinks about this now. Do they believe what the Riddler said? That we had Thomas Wayne pay Hush money and got Falcone to do this or whatever? You know, Bruce knows otherwise from Alfred that Thomas Wayne didn't expect Falcone to kill him. Obviously, a bit of a naive thing to think about there, and that's the thing that Falcone had over Thomas Wayne. But still, what does the public think? So it is plausible to think that the son could now blame Bruce as a result, and maybe has some own, you know, mental aspects to why he wants to mimic Bruce Wayne's look and maybe tear down his life. Who knows? I guess it could naturally kind of pave out in that way in a very typical Hush storyline. As for the Court of Owls, this cover-up, I just don't know about the Court of Owls. I know people really want to see it. I know Robert Pattinson himself has said, oh man, the Court of Owls is so cool, you know, it'd be really cool to see them pop up. It depends how much the future movies get into corruption, and the only reason I'm doubtful of Matt Reeves getting to that anytime soon is because, think about it, the Court of Owls are incredible. I would love to see them in live action, but if they had an opportunity to do it, I feel like that would have been the first movie, because the whole first movie was about a guy exposing the corruption that goes back a long time in Gotham, and he didn't even uncover any Court of Owls involvement. And I know people are going to say, but that's the point. They're meant to be the people behind the people behind the people. But I feel like getting to the reality of it, doing another movie where there's even more corruption being exposed, I just don't think they're going to retread that same path. Granted, it would be different, and it would be cool that Bruce thought that he exposed the corruption, or should I say that Riddler did, but he found out about it. You know, he was being guided by the Riddler along the way of the first movie. But for another movie to be like, oh, there's even more corruption, I don't know. I just got a feeling when you have 3 films, you're not going to go through corruption again. And I know there's always going to be corruption in Gotham. That's something Batman's always going to have to deal with. But the first movie got rid of the key figures, you know, the commissioner, the mayor, the district attorney. Sure, there could be Court of Owls still. As for like a cover-up or something, I just don't know. You could always argue that canonically there is still the Court of Owls, even if Matt Reeves doesn't get to it. I just feel like when you have 2 movies, they should probably put the spotlight on other villains and not retread necessarily straight-up corruption again. Think about the reviews. Even if it would be like a really cool movie, you would have a lot of reviewers saying, I really thought this was great, maybe a really cool adaptation of the Court of Owls storyline, but, you know, the first movie was kind of about, hey, this person's corrupt. Oh, damn, the commissioner's corrupt. Oh, really? The DA's corrupt? Oh, you know, so I now there's this? That's not me saying I don't like the Court of Owls. It's just I'm really trying to be realistic here. So I know I went a bit sideways with this one, but yeah, the Hush storyline could still develop. It could happen in such a way where, obviously with Bruce likely coming out of his shell more and more in the city, maybe doing a lot more charitable things, we have somebody trying to mimic him and give him a bad name. But other than that, I don't think that necessarily Hush will be given the spotlight either. I think it could be another villain, but I could be wrong. I'd love to know your ideas about how they could organically expand on the Sins of the Father aspect, other than just something that is very tropey and cliche, like, oh, because of what happened in the first movie, we have now the son really more enraged by ever after learning even more about what happened to his father, and he looks at the Waynes and the last existing Wayne, and that is Bruce. Maybe he could threaten to expose him being Batman and all kinds of other things, but I do feel like there's a better story out there with another Rogues Gallery villain for potentially the last 2 movies. So Captain Kirk says, hey Boba, saw this and I figured I'd throw my question in the ring. So I'm guessing there will be a theme change in the next film, but what do you think of a perspective change in some aspects to the sequel? Do you think in the Batman 2 we will start to see the perspective of the city of Gotham and its view of the Batman from vengeance to watchful protector? Or do some still see him as a freak, and how that plays in on the next villain possibly using that divide to the city, given how the Riddler's plan to level Gotham may have left lasting effects to the city, dividing them in more than just one way? Yeah, this is something I haven't actually really spoken about much in the discussion series at all, so it's a really interesting question. In the end of the first movie definitely set up a new perspective of Batman. And that's something that I haven't pondered too much until now. Like, really, what is the movie, the second movie, the sequel, going to address with that? At the beginning of the first movie, when we had that mayoral debate going on with Bella Real on the TV, she says when Riddler was about to kill the mayor, we have a masked vigilante running around now. Like, basically, that's how bad things have got, where people feel like they have to do that. But now at the end, even though there's been clippings of, oh, this is what the Batman looks like, wanted, and things like that, people might be grateful for him because the news report playing in the Joker and Riddler scene in Arkham, it says, saying that masked vigilante saves hundreds. So there will be people who have a good perspective of Batman. He is indeed a symbol of hope, and I would love to see that some people look to it, like it's shown in scenes, shown through citizens maybe being saved, who knows, maybe more news reports. Maybe it can be shown in the most simplistic way of new news report, beginning portion of the movie, first 25 minutes, there's a new report saying that masked vigilante has done it again, instead of maybe a more negative outlook on like, oh, vigilante, like what's he doing, who is he, but instead it's reported on maybe by Vicky Vale saying like, that masked vigilante who saved people above the garden or whatever has done it again and saved people from this. I don't know. Do you see what I mean? That would be a great way to show that perspective shift. I don't know if the next villain would capitalize on a divide, though, because I do feel like more people would be on the Batman side than not after the ending of the first movie. I think you're going to have cops, though. Various cops view him as a freak, but already that could have started to change as well. For example, the cop who was like, hey, Mr. Wayne, and he was with Batman at the beginning, calling him a freak, trying to stop him from entering the crime scene with the mayor, but at the end, he was a bit reluctant, but he let Batman in on the crime scene where he found the carpet tools. So I feel like even cops like him, some cops might begin to respect the Batman. He brought in Falcone. Granted, he got shot, but that's one thing I kind of thought in that moment. The police were, shoot to kill in the precinct when Batman was escaping. Yet when he walked out of the Iceberg Lounge, you had all those cops there. And I did used to think, is this a bit of like an because like you were willing to kill him, yet now he's standing here right before you, having evaded the GCPD. But I think the difference there is that he was bringing out the biggest crime boss in Gotham. And are they really going to shoot him there and then? So I do think even some perspective change there was already established, that the cops were looking at this man, the Batman, has brought in Carmine Falcone, and they want to arrest him. So yeah, I do think that more people will like him than not. I don't know if a villain will possibly use a divide that the city has. The Riddler's plan about leveling that aspect of Gotham, that area of Gotham, was not really so much about the Batman. That was more about just Gotham in of itself. So I don't think anyone blames the Batman for that. So yeah, I actually think it's only going to be good vibes from that of the city, the people of Gotham. And if anything, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what could, be shown through that in various scenes in the second movie. All right, so I think for the last question, because we've been going for a while now, Nefman Jones says, Boba, how would you feel about Reeves doing a loose adaptation of Batman Venom, and how far would you want them to go with the less PG aspects of addiction? Seeing as this Bruce is based off Kurt Cobain, it would be a logical inclusion. Yeah, it's more like inspired, I guess you could say, with the look, the kind of reclusive vibe of Kurt and everything. I know Kurt, obviously had struggles himself with addiction, but Batman, I could see that working, because even though he's turned into more of a symbol of hope and he's developed in so many ways in the first movie, maybe he innocently does stumble across something like that of what is being experimented on as a booster like Venom, and he does get addicted, but it's out of innocent aspects. Or maybe the second villain, let's say it's more of a physical threat. This paves the way for Bane in the future, maybe in this universe, even if we don't get to him. But regardless, Venom's being worked on, and because Batman always wants to do more, despite him coming out of his shell more in the second movie or in the third movie, if this is in the third movie, who knows, he really is presented with a challenge where he wants to enhance himself in a way that he felt helpless before, because obviously with Batman Venom, he failed in one regard, which, really haunted him with regards to that storyline. I don't want to give too much away for people who haven't read it. And then obviously even withdrawing from that, with how long he spent withdrawing from that in the story, would be an interesting aspect to get into. So I think there is plenty of logical ways they could include that. The most basic premise being that something happens in a similar way where Batman feels as though he could have done something and he's not going to let it happen again. It's only done out of good faith where he wants to improve himself, but ultimately he gets very addicted, and that would not really be any good for him. I don't know if they're going to do this per se. Again, just to those who don't know, that wasn't Venom at the end. It was just adrenaline. I feel like if it was Venom and they had made it Venom, that could have been a really good segue to him only carrying around 1 or 2 vials with him just in case he needs a boost. And again, that scene of where he hulked out would have been so good to kind of be like, oh, in the second movie, maybe Alfred fears that he's starting to get addicted to it, maybe. But again, it was just adrenaline. And the reason why he got so, like, you know, kind of roided out in that moment is because, you know, he had a massive shot of adrenaline straight into his bloodstream that gave him that second wind, you know? I get how people get the Venom, especially when it was green. That was a bit of a mean tease there. But again, the concept art book shows it was adrenaline. But I don't know if they're going to do it. Ultimately, I don't know if they are. I would love to see something like that, especially if he's up against someone like Mr. Freeze to kind of maybe take on a bit more of a physical front or something like that. Maybe something happens that he feels like he let someone down where he could have ultimately used strength in that situation, but he didn't have Venom at the time. But for now, I think they'll probably put some doubt on it, but they could definitely push the boundary of some of the, you say, less PG aspects of addiction. I think they would go pretty far. I think they would show like this kind of delirium-y kind of, you know, aspect of Bruce struggling, his reliance on doing it. Maybe he's losing a bit of his perspective when he's going out there and trying to not use it. He's kind of getting irritable. It might even make him more impulsive. He's meant to have been a bit more of a grown Batman now, but he's kind of reverting back to some brutal tactics because of the Venom. It could impact him in so many ways, but the question is, are they really going to do that in the second and third movie with some other stories they could explore? That's what puts a bit of an X to doubt for me for now, even though if they had like 7, 8 movies, yeah, they could easily get to that at some point in time. But Bat Family, that is, I think, everything we're going to get through today. I do apologize that I couldn't get through more because there is a shite ton of screenshots that I've got of people's questions. So, as always, if your question wasn't featured in this video, there's a good chance it will be in future installments. It might be another few weeks before I get to that. But as always, I just really want to know what you think about everything we discussed today. I really do read every comment. It's very easy for me to do so, whether it's from my laptop or my YouTube app on my phone. I try and heart as many as I can and respond to as many as I can, the most interesting responses that I can have a bit of a discussion with. So I feel like there was some good discussion in today's video that can really be fleshed out into what could be possible in that of the Batman 2. If you got this far in a video, I'd love for you to prove it by leaving the hashtag Sins of the Father. That's a fairly easy one to put. I do encourage you to check out my 10 things I want to see in the Batman 2 video. It'd be great for you to leave your responses for 10 things if you can come up with that many of what you would like to see in the Batman 2. If you want to support the channel even more, I do have links in the description down below to my Teespring store. There's a super thanks enabled on the channel, and thank you to those who have left super thanks in their comments. I really am grateful for that, and I appreciate that support. And you can just follow me on Twitter, leave a like on the video, and consider subscribing if you want to stay up to date with more videos like this, and of course news updates when it comes to actual tangible information for the Batman universe. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you, Bat Family, in the next video. Goodbye.